Welcome to our Brownbag seminar this week. In the series of seminars we usually organize live at the Center for Southeast European Studies in Graz. I'm very glad today to have Ejub Kostić with us. He's about to finish PhD student at the University of Belgrade, the Faculty for Political Science. He would have been also one of the researchers in Graz, but unfortunately we have to just have a virtual presence. Ivan will be talking about his PhD topic, which is about the construction, development, and transformation of identity of the young Muslim movement. So he will be sharing his research as it is about to be completed as part of his PhD. So Ivan, thank you for finding the time and talking to us.
Thank you a lot. So should I start now immediately?
Yes, please, go ahead. Go ahead, yes.
Okay, super. First of all, thank you, of course, for having me and for Center for Southeast European Studies. I'm glad that I'm here with you. I would like in the beginning, to share with you that this is really the final phase of my PhD thesis. I hope that it will be finished until the July, August. So the thing that I would like to ask all the participants and who are present, the people who are present, that they really be as much as they can critical and to maybe share their direct views or maybe some proposals or anything what they have in mind that they see problematic in my thesis. And what I will say today, especially because the reason why I'm saying this is because this is the last moment that I can do some changes in my manuscript and what will be my thesis in the end. Before I start, I just would like to, let's say, introduce myself to some degree, or let's say to tell you, where I'm coming from. Very briefly, I have BA in Arabic Studies, Arabic Language and Literature. After that, I got my MA in Islamic Studies, Islamic History and Civilization. And my MA thesis was dealing with Islamic movements in the Middle East and Indian subcontinent, particularly with the Jamaat Islami in Pakistan, India, and the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. When I finished my MA, it was for me, let's say, logical that I move from the Middle Eastern region and so on, and that I focus more on the Balkans because I'm from the Balkans, I'm from Serbia, from Belgrade, and to try to focus on maybe some of the Islamic movement or some Islamic organization that is present or was present in this region. And through this process, I came about, to decide to work on young Muslim movement. As I don't know how many of you know about about young Muslim movement. I will give afterwards a little bit of some historical, some historical things and informations about the movement. But first of all, I would like to also emphasize that until now, in this field, it is not a small number of people dealt with Islamic movements as such in the Balkans, especially also with this is the case with with the young Muslim movement. Until now, we had indirectly, maybe not directly, the Professor Xavier Bugarel, who dealt until now with the young Muslim movement, but his main, let's say, topic of research wasn't young Muslim movement as such. He was much more focused on the 90s and the Party of Democratic Action and politics of Party of Democratic Action, and also beside the Xavier Bugarel, there is now recently published the PhD thesis, which is also a book and that is a book by Armina Omerica, who has much more dedicated herself definitely to young Muslim movement, but still her a significant part of her book was dealing also with the Islamic community, or let's say Islam in Bosnia as such. This will not be the case in my PhD thesis. This is very where I differ from her thesis, because in my thesis I will be much more focused on the ideological aspects of the young Muslim movement, and also about young Muslim movement in some kind of comparative. I will do this some kind of comparative perspective of the young Muslim movement, comparing, or let's say situating the movement of young Muslim movement in the worldwide Islamic movement and such. I worked on my thesis, now I'm working on my thesis almost 5-6 years already. So, of course, my field research was in Bosnia, logically. I spent there 2 years. I was based in Sarajevo, but what is important that I mentioned also that I really, I was going all around the Bosnia, because it is very problematic in this moment that you find the people who are the members of the young Muslim movement and who are still alive. The original, the young Muslim movement. I worked there very closely, and I have to give my thanks also. I will use this opportunity to give my thanks, and really I'm more than grateful to the young Muslim organization, which exists again from the 90s today, and they have a very rich archive. So I worked there for almost 1 year in this young Muslim archives. They have really huge, immense quantity of documents, videos, and many stuff. Also, the proceedings from, or let's say, these things that are related to the court cases, these all the processes that were against young Muslims in the end of the 40s during the Tito regime, and again in the 1983 trial when the group of Islamic intellectuals were charged in the famous Sarajevo process. So during this my let's say my work, my field research, I collected really a huge quantity of material during this field research, like official pamphlets, documents, journals. There are 2 journals that young Muslim movement were publishing in the end of the 40s. It is, the first was, the name of it is Mujahid, and the second one is Pakistan. The reason why it is the name of the Pakistan, because the Pakistan was the state that was declared as an Islamic state, and they were very fascinated by this idea. So they took this name for their journal, Pakistan. Also, beside these, let's say, official documents, journals, and so on, I've done, as I said, a series of conversations with former members of the young Muslim movement. From this original young Muslim movement, we will come to this problem of, I had very interesting stories to share who is about this problem about is this young Muslim movement from the 40s the same what is the young Muslim movement, and what were the activities of the individuals afterwards. But I done the serious conversation with the people from young Muslim movement, and also with their relatives, with their families, children, and so on, grandchildren, and so on. And also I gathered a huge, let's say, quantity. This is very interesting, the autobiographies, not only of these most prominent members like Ali Izetbegovic, who was, I suppose that all of you know who is Ali Izetbegovic. I don't have to spare the time to lose time to explain who he was, but he was one of the main members of the young Muslim movement and one of the founders of the young Muslim movement. but also other some prominent names from the 90s like Omer Bechman, Sali Bechman, and many others. You know, some of them, they wrote autobiographies, but also I got the unpublished autobiographies from the members of Young Muslim Movement who were less prominent, and but they were keen to, you know, to write their autobiographies, and they were also in the mood to share these autobiographies with me, despite that these autobiographies are not published. So I'm also grateful to all of these people, and I hope that I will not, in any sense, you know, disappoint them or their families or so on when I will use these documents. This is it about, yes, my methodology will be based on the, let's say the main methodology will be some kind of qualitative discourse analysis of this material that I have, of course, from the 40s, but as well the documents that are available from the processes during the 40s, because we had 3 legal processes against, or let's say in 3 phases. In 1946, there was a first phase, these legal processes against the members of against young members of Young Muslim Movement. In that 46th, Ali Izetbegovic was sentenced for 3 years of jail, and very famous also prominent member Najib Shachirbegovic, who left afterwards to America, and he lived in the United States for all his life. Then there was a second, let's say, set of trials against the Young Muslim members. That was in 1947. It was more, in 1947, it was more directed toward the people who are around the Islamic community and somehow they connected to the Young Muslim movement. But the emphasis was on the, let's say, more, under the quotation, more radical, or those who are, let's say, not in line with the communist regime, or didn't want to be in line with the communist Titoist regime from the Islamic community. So they were tried in the 1947, and then in 1949 it was the most important. It is the most important, let's say, year when we are talking about the Young Muslim movement, because in that year it was a huge action of the Tito's regime to absolutely dissolve, or let's say to destroy, the Young Muslim movement as such. And Tito's regime, of course, succeeded in this. And now we have this question, this is what I mentioned, because even Ali Izetbegovic and many of them in their writings, they're saying that in that moment, Young Muslim movement disappeared as such. Yeah, but I have a huge problem with these claims of theirs, because in the same time, parallelly to this, that they are saying that the Young Muslim movement disappeared, the core group of the Young Muslim movement absolutely, especially when they came out from the jails in the 60s and 70s, they absolutely continued the work of the Young Muslim movement and spreading the ideas that they were spreading as a Young Muslim movement. And here it is very important for me that I'm using here the Charles Tilly, who is one of the very important academics who are dealing with the social movement theory, and he's clearly stating that we can still, identify some movement that survive, as long as the individuals who were in that particular movement are still active, and not only active, but they are promoting the absolutely same ideas. So it is not about the name as such, Young Muslim Movement, but about the ideas and about the people who were in that movement, and if they were, if they stayed, let's say, absolutely, let's say connected, or let's say if they stayed and continued to spread the ideas that they were spreading. This is, we can say that it is the same movement And because of this, I'm using the young Muslim movement from 1939 until 1990. I will, of course, now share with you that why I have, let's say, three main questions, let's say, like this. My time is running, I see now. So the first is that, of course, what I already shared with you was the reasons for the establishing of the movement. With such a strong Islamic conviction in the time when the Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1939, 1940, 1941 was already, let's say, secularized, completely secularized state. For this first period, let's say, of the movement, we can say that, and this first period is from 1939 to 1949, okay? So, for this first period, is extremely important that we have in mind that they were absolutely religious organization. They didn't have any connection to the ethnic or national ideas or anything like this. Even the Bosnia as such was in the second plan. Their main obsession was Islam and the spreading of the Islamic ideas, Sharia rulings, and so on and so on. So now what we are very often reading, we have the opportunity to read in the papers, or I don't know, in the many discussions now, present discussions are about it, and even young Muslim members, they are a little bit, changing the history now, and this is that they are claiming that they were some kind of ethnic or national or proto-national movement. No, they were absolutely religious movement. And this is what you can see from not only from all the material that is available there, but also in the conversation with these people, and also the people when they are stating who were their ideologies, the who they followed, and so on and so on, who had the most influence on them. So they were under the influence of the absolutely Islamic thinkers and Islamic activists around the world, not only from the Bosnia. So in that sense, it is very interesting how in that secularized state it is, this is what I'm trying to answer, how this kind of movement, which we can say that it is a pan-Islamic movement, appeared. Then there is the second phase, and also the second question is related to this second phase, and that is how the movement developed after the 1949 and when it was crushed by Tito's regime. What changed? And what is interesting is, and here I'm using a very important one of the, not maybe one, it is the most important book that dealt with the politics of Pan-Islam and politics of Pan-Islam ideology and organization by Jacob Landau, the French academic. And what he's also stating, and is important to that I now emphasize, is that he's dividing the two types, or let's say he's saying that there are two types of Pan-Islamic movement. The first of these Pan-Islamic movements ground their activities on the ideas of religious and cultural, let's say, unity of Muslim world. Yeah, and the second one, on second string of this Pan-Islamic movement, is later advocates political and economic unity. I'm sorry. Oh, the political unity and of the Muslim world, or let's say the Muslim Ummah and such, So there is a huge difference. And what is important for this second phase, that we have, or let's say we can say that there is, under the quotation marks, some kind of, let's say, even radicalization of the views, even if despite it they spent so many years in jail and that they were in illegal activities. In these from the 1960s, 1970s, there are a series of, first of all, in that period we have Islamic Declaration, which is written by Ali Izetbegovic, and also Islam between East and West. Also, we have very important pieces of the members of Young Muslim Movement in Takvim. That was a journal that was published by Islamic Community of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they were writing their articles by pseudonym. They were signed. All these articles are signed by pseudonyms, but we know now who was who, because we know who used which pseudonym. And when you look at these articles from Takvim from in the 60s and 70s, and when you take into account about the Islamic Declaration and Islam between us, you see that they changed their let's say focus on this much more into this direction of this political aspect of Islam. So they became, in this period, we can say absolutely Islamists or Islamic political movement as such, even if they changed completely their way of activism. They dealt from absolutely legally and so on and so on and so on. Florian said that I have 20 minutes, so I don't know if I have time to finish the third phase, which is, I think, an extremely important one.
Or go ahead. I mean, we have we started a bit late, so you could take a few more minutes. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. So, because the third phase is the crucial, let's say, my question that I'm dealing with, and this is this radical shift from this pan-Islamic, or let's say Islamist worldview that they held after the Sarajevo process, or let's say Sarajevo trial. I don't know how many of you heard about it, but it was in 1983. And almost all the members, or let's say all the convicted in 1983 in the Sarajevo process or Sarajevo trial, they get out from the jail. They were released in the 1988 or 1996, 1987, and so on, depend of the person. But and then from 1988 to 1990, you have absolute shift from this, let's say, pan-Islamic worldview. They're absolutely, abandoning this pan-Islamic view in favor of this ethno-religious ideas, and completely, let's say, they are secularizing their ideas. They are putting the emphasis on Bosnia much more, and so on. Not much more, absolutely, because they didn't deal with the Bosnia before that, absolutely. So that was a huge change in their way of understanding the things and so on. So now we can, I expose these three crucial phases, but because I don't have any more time, I can share for the end that in this, this last phase, or let's say this third phase, I'm using the theories of Mark Jugendsmeyer and Rogers Brubaker to explain these, let's say, changes. But we can, of course, I can answer, or let's say in more details about these third phases, and also many other stuff that I didn't say until now, and I have a lot of things to say in the question and answer this now.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Ivan, for sharing your research with us. So open the floor to questions. If you want to ask a question, you can either raise your hand virtually, the raise your hand function, or use the chat option, because of course, otherwise we will not be able to tell. So maybe I just, before people think of a good question to ask you, because, okay, so you're arguing that there's this continuity of, so as a movement over time, even though in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was very much underground and very much also fragmented, I guess, as a group. So to which, I mean, I wanted to maybe for the early phases ask you if it was so not ethnic, not national in any way. To which degree did it try to reach out to Muslims elsewhere, at least in Yugoslavia? Because, I mean, from the narrative I'm familiar with, it's very much focused on Bosnia. It's very much focused on what would become Bosniaks, and not so much on Albanians or other Muslims in Yugoslavia. So I'm just kind of wondering to which degree there were pan-Yugoslav networks, or whether it was exclusively focusing on Bosnia.
Yeah, it's a good question. You have to first of all have this in mind, the language barrier. So the thing is that they had a problem to reach out to the Albanian Muslims in the Yugoslavia because of the language barrier. But they are not mentioning Bosnia absolutely at all. So their language is, if you would translate it to English or any other language or to Albanian, it would be absolute. So for example, the papers they were writing, or articles that they were writing in the 60s or the 70s, it could be signed by any other Islamic movement in the world, from Ikhwanul Muslimin in Egypt to Indonesian Muhammadiyah, or any Nahdlatul Ulama, or anyone, in the world. So this is by the way, they are not mentioning so many the Bosnian Muslims as such. In Islamic declaration, they're dealing much more with the state of affairs in the Islamic world, and so on and so on. And they were, especially in the 1979, when the Iranian Revolution happened with the Khomeini and everything, they were immensely influenced with this. They were ecstatic, by this. There is a very important article that wasn't published anywhere, but I have it. It is from 1982. So you can imagine. So it is until the 80s stage. So just prior to the Sarajevo process trial. This paper is written by Ali Izetbegovic, and this is absolutely, this paper is against the national, and he's in that paper, he's dealing with the national ethnic movements in the Arab Muslim world. So he's attacking national ethnic identification and the secular state as such, absolutely directly and bluntly, So he's absolutely open that, the only answer should be and has to be the Islamic answer, the Islamic unity, the Islamic state, and so on and so on and so on. So in that sense, I think that there was a language barrier regarding the Yugoslavia. And also you have to be also aware, and this will be in my thesis, that, for example, you have a very significant Sanjak group of young Muslims who were also tried, jailed, and so on and so on. So they were definitely were going beyond the borders just of Bosnia. But of course, the problem was, as I said, this language barrier. But their message was also very important. You are in Austria, so they were very important because of Adil Zulfikar Pasic and diaspora in Germany, especially also Smile Balic in Vienna, and Teofik Velagic. He lived his whole life in Vienna when he escaped from Yugoslavia. So one of my colleague, Rijad Dutovic, she was researching a lot about the influence, or let's say the importance of these dissidents who went to Switzerland and Austria for establishing the Islamic community of Austria and many other Islamic organizations in Austria and so on. In that, they found very easily the common language with the diaspora from other Arabic or Muslim countries all around the world, And also in the 60s, you have now, it is not anymore any kind of secret. There was the first, and Ali Izetbegovic was writing about this, and you have the book was published by that individual from Sudan. So you have the first also connections between the members of young Muslim movement and those students from Arabic countries who were sympathizers, or let's say maybe even activists of Muslim Brotherhood, or the offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Islamic world, Muslim world. So definitely, they were Islamic movement, and their message was absolutely concentrated on this. They weren't absolutely and not at all. Even you cannot find not to mention Bosniak national identity or this discussion about national identities and so on, were absolutely absent in that period. And with this I will conclude. But I also had the conversation with some other intellectuals who were very active in the 90s. So it is very interesting that it will be my thesis that one particular Serbian intellectual, when there was some gathering in the United Nations in New York, she was speaking with the Shachirbegovic that I mentioned, Shachirbegovic, who escaped in 1940s to the United States. And she asked him about this Bosnian nationality. They were discussing about what is going on in Yugoslavia and this and that. And he openly said, listen, the young Muslim people and the culture, the group that I belonged, we never wanted this national, and we were not interested in this national ethnic identification. We were absolutely focused in our thinking and everything in this cultural, or let's say religious specificity of ours, that we somehow, secure our religious rights and our religious position in Yugoslavia or in the Yugoslavia after the Tito.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Let me see if there's anybody who has any questions. By the way, if you don't find the chat option, you can find it at the bottom of the screen. If you want to click on that, then you get the chat box and you can ask any questions. Yes, we have one question there. Claudia, can you activate your microphone and your camera and ask your question? So that Ivan doesn't just see me, but notices that there are other people there. Yes.
So can you see me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, I can see myself. So thank you very much for your presentation. So you mentioned that after the 1980s, after the Sarajevo trials, the young Muslim movement became increasingly focused on Bosnia. So I was wondering what sort of international cooperation remained even after the 1980s or during the 1980s. And in what terms did international cooperation change, and how did it change?
You mean international cooperation with who?
Because you said that the young Muslim movement was in the beginning not so much focused on Bosnia itself, but it was like it had international cooperation in some terms. So I was wondering how it developed, this sort of international cooperation throughout the decades.
Okay, if I understand you correctly, so you are asking me what is the international connection between young Muslim movement with the Islamic movements, or with the who?
Well, that's actually up to you. Where do you see continuities, and where do you see
changes? But I guess beyond Yugoslavia, that's basically so I guess primarily with the other Muslim movements, I guess.
Okay, with the Islamic movements. Okay, so the thing is, that in the 60s and 70s, of course, that it was very hard to establish any kind of movement because the Tito regime was very strict. But they had these preliminary, let's say, contacts. What I mentioned, these were more informal contacts and personal contacts with some of the, as I said, sympathizers of activists of Islamic movements all around the world who were studying in former Yugoslavia. Afterwards, in the end of 80s and the beginning of 90s, we know, of course, that, but that was not anymore on the level of the young Muslim movement, because in that moment, but these individuals as representatives of the Party of Democratic Action, they had, of course, very strong ties with Iran, especially, and to mention that there was a delegation before the Sarajevo trial. They were even it was mentioned in this Sarajevo trial against the members of Young Muslim, that they established the connection with the Iranian regime and so on. So. They had some very strong connections with the Turkey, with Iran, with and those let's say movements or groups inside of these countries who are much more, let's say, Islamically oriented. So we know that during the 90s there were a lot of, let's say, help that were coming from the Islamic countries and Muslim countries, from the Islamic organizations and Islamic movements who were helping Bosnia during the war. So in that sense, this, without a doubt, is one of the let's say it is also that was definitely was because the Ali Izetbegovic and the group around him had these connections. So this was the outcome, of course. So I hope that I answered you the question. But if you are asking me about some particular, brotherhood, or let's say some kind of establishment of some kind of unity with some other groups, or some collective action with some other groups and so on, this wasn't the case, especially during the Tito regime. Afterwards, it was on this level of this, let's say, the Ali Izetbegovic and Bosnia, were reaching out to the help of the Islamic or Muslim countries for the help.
Thanks. Any other questions at this particular point? Armina, do you want to go ahead?
Hello, hi. I hope you can hear and see me. Thank you for your presentation. I have actually, I think for you, a very simple question, but we can always hear very controversial answers on these questions. You can perhaps help us with it. My question is, what do you think, when did Ali Izetbegovic ideological change from Pan-Muslim to Bosniak take place? Was it in the prison, or before or after the prison? And how do you interpret Islamska deklaracija in the terms of nationalism? Can you find there's more pan-Islamism or more Bosniak or Bosnian nationalism?
Yeah. The first question is maybe it is the let's say easy one, but it is so complicated to identify what happened. So, I even this is one of the things that I would also appreciate if someone has to share maybe some critical opinions about this. But until the 90, when Ali Izetbegovic and the group that was tried in the 1983, when they left out, when they got out from the jail, you can see from the first couple of interviews, especially from Ali Izetbegovic, and especially one is interested in Preporod, Journal of Islamic Community of Bosnia and Herzegovina. You see that he is still in that moment much more on this line, on that Pan-Islamic, or let's say that Islamic ideas and this and that are so fundamental to him. He's even saying in this interview, "My faith is Islam. I'm dying for the Islam." So he's absolutely still very on this, let's say, absolutely in the thinking in this direction of Islam, as an Islamist thinker or Islamic thinker, not as a national ethnic. But I think that then happened because in the jail he developed the idea, and he's stating in his autobiography this very clearly, that he in the jail he got the idea to establish a political party. So, and I think that when he got out from the jail, that he realized that with this, in this circumstance, Bosnia, very well what was Bosnia in the end of the 80s, how secularized this country was, and didn't have any connection with these Islamic ideas, and so on and so on. I think that he became absolutely realistic that if he goes to the elections, these first democratic elections and so on, with some kind of Islamist ideas, that he will get 1% or maybe less. This is the first thing. So I think that he became very pragmatical with this political, and this is very interesting because we see this in some other, this is interesting in this, and will be dealt in I will deal with this in this comparative perspective, because some other Islamic movements also showed some kind of pragmatism when they entered the politics and so on, and they became much more rigid and strict. But in his case, he absolutely abandoned this Islamic, or let's say Islamist idea, absolutely. He stayed firm believer. Religion, of course, stayed a very important part of his worldview and everything, and so on and so on. But in the politics, he definitely defined the Party of Democratic Action as a national ethnic political party. And also he, of course, he absolutely accepted the new democratic, secularized, and so on order. This is the first thing. And there is also one very important thing that he had in that period. He got a rival, a competitor, and this is Adil Zulfikar Pashic. And Adil Zulfikar Pashic was absolutely stunned, and he's also sharing in his autobiographies to which degree, you know, Ali Izetbegovic and this group of around him, they were so Islamically oriented that he was shocked. He's even mentioning one particular I don't know what is this rally, yeah, of Party of Democratic Action in, I think it was in Kladuša, so that doesn't matter. But where he was absolutely stunned by the atmosphere there, that he stating that that was like, you know, that he came to some kind of Islam, absolutely, you know, Islamically oriented, Sharia oriented organization, that all the symbols, everything, absolutely everything was in that let's say was absolutely Islamically colored, yeah. So I think that, you know, then there was this competition between Zulfikar Pashic and Alia inside of SDA. Zulfikar Pashic got the much more the support from Mohamed Filipovic and that string, yeah, and Alia understood that also he has to adopt, and he even saying in one of his interviews, absolutely, you know, he is stating, the journalist is asking him about the ideas of Adil Zulfikar Pashic, and that there is a rivalry between them, and he's stating, I don't know why he's angry, because I took over, not that he's adopted, but I took over all of his ideas and wishes about how the Party of Democratic Action should look like. I absolutely abandoned many of my ideas, and I took and concentrated on these national ethnic ideas that Zulfikar Pashic was pushing, you know, for in their internal discussions and so on and so on. This is, I hope that I answered on this. This is, and also then afterwards, the war came and so on and so on. So you also, this is very important that we have in mind, because, you know, in these disastrous situations, you had somehow to homogenize and to let's say the Muslims in Bosnia and in the time of the war and so on and so on. And I think that, you know, he also understood that Islam can be beneficial to some degree, but that he put that it is much more, let's say, powerful, that he goes to that he affirms this ethnic and national card and so on, and to nationalize the religion, yeah, and not to religionalize the national identity. So, and again, about the Islamska Deklaracija, what you asked, absolutely, there is I didn't count, but I think that he even didn't mention once, maybe he did, but it is absolutely absent. Bosniak national identity, Bosniak, anything which is in any way directed to, or connected with the national identification in Islamic declaration is absent, or if it is present, then Ali Izetbegović is criticizing this. His absolute focus is on Islamic unity and this ummah, idea of ummah, of Muslim believers, the unity of Muslim believers all around the world.
Thanks. Any other questions we have? This particular point. I would maybe ask, because you asked specifically about social movements, or you kind of were expressing your interest there, and I was kind of curious, to which degree can you really talk about a movement when, you know, basically you're talking about a group of people around Ali Izetbegović who retained that connection from the late 40s until the 80s, but I guess there are two questions. To which degree was there as a social movement you anticipate not just writing books, but also some kind of activism, social activism? So to which degree was there like an attempt to organize people beyond writing texts and being quite intellectual in a certain way? And to which degree was there really a group rather than just, you know, a few individuals who maintained that connection? So I guess the kind of line of continuity you're drawing, to which degree is it really just the line of continuity of people, or is there a structural, in a certain way, a kind of idea that, because especially before 79, I mean, with the rise of Iran as a case where you have political Islam in power, before that the idea of a lot of the Islamic movements was much more to be, was often much more intellectual and maybe less political, especially because, as you said, they were also aware that they were in Yugoslavia, where the chances of an Islamic, you know, any kind of political Islam was structurally very restrained and limited. So they couldn't possibly imagine that they would be able to found a political party or become politically active. So what are the kind of structures and ideas they had before the late 1980s, really?
Yeah, thank you a lot for this question. I think this is one of the most challenging and crucial questions that I will have to answer in my PhD thesis. And this is where I said in the beginning that there is, I would say, a very interesting anecdote also that I got also from them. You probably heard about Malika Salibegović al-Bosnavi, who was also tried in 1983, but she was very critical toward Ali Izetbegović and the group. And I had the one show in Bosnia where I was talking about young Muslim movement. And after 2 or 3 days after this show, I got a call from Malika Salibegović, who she passed away, unfortunately. I didn't know her, and she was absolutely furious and angry with me because I was stating exactly what you were asking me, that they were a group. Yeah. But listen, the thing here is that, the period from the 1949, when the group was dissolved, definitely in the sense of what you said, as a structure, that it is organized group and like say some kind of organization. But you have absolutely, undoubtedly, in these 60s and 70s, very, how to say, it is just a group of intellectuals. Yes, we can say this, but in the same time, they are stating that their work, that they had the tactics. So they are writing about, very concretely, writing about in which way they will continue the struggle and let's say implementation and dissemination or any other, and influencing the wider public or the Muslims and so on regarding the Islamic ideas and their ideas. So they definitely, and also they are stating that after all of them, when they got out from the jail, they again established between them very strong connections, even with the diaspora, not to mention in Sarajevo. And then the focal point became Hussein Jozo in Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who also was giving them the floor in Sarajeva Jam, in the Imperial's Mosque in Sarajevo. So they were having gatherings in the imperial mosque. There were, of course, the informal gatherings because of the Tito's regime, but these gatherings took place. Sorry. So in that sense, they remained in some way as a group, not with this name anymore, maybe Young Muslim Group, but they remained, and their activism was synchronized, and also where you can absolutely see that they had some kind of influence in their work in Imperial Mosque, for example, and these lectures and these writings and all of these informal meetings and gatherings, is that you have the whole second generation, like Hasan Cengic, Bicakcic, Mustafa Mojkis-Pahic, and all of Jamaluddin Latic. All of these Islamic intellectuals, they were inspired and they were introduced with their ideas during the 60s and 70s, okay? And you have these gatherings in Tabachki Masjid in one small mosque in Sarajevo, where these youth in that moment, young people like Hasan Cengic and so on, they were giving the lectures, and they were absolutely inspired by the young Muslim movement. So you can see, there is some kind, not only the continuity of their activities, but also they had some kind, they intended to leave some kind of mark, and they did it, because this second generation showed up. And it is funny for me because I don't know why they are defending so much against this Sarajevo trial. It is going into because it is okay. It is disastrous what will happen to these people, of course, and because they were sentenced and just because of verbal delict and so on and so on. But for what they were, let's say, accused, that they were the proponents, or let's say that they were, pan-Islamists and this and that, this was true. So the communist regime, there wasn't, they weren't inventing, One of the most, I would turn as my PhD thesis now, is the elaborate from UDBA, from the Secret Service of Yugoslavia, and it is written on, it has almost 200 pages, this elaborate on them. And this, I don't know who wrote it, because it is not signed by an individual, but this is absolutely stunning. This is brilliant, how to say, first of all, this is extraordinary knowledge of Islamic movements as such, the worldwide movements. And the whole, this elaborate is so well written and explained and so on and so on. So it is stunning. So in that sense, I would say, that, they were, for me, I mentioned that Charles Tilly, what he said in his book, and he has a whole chapter and explanation about this. I really think that this is extremely important, that we cannot just, say, okay, there is not any more organization and the same name and so on, but there are, especially in these, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, under the Nasser regime, there was also this let's say, under quotation, discontinuity, or for example, now, what is happening under the Sisi regime. But these groups are still functioning regardlessly of what is going on, because they cannot, publicly be active and so on and so on. So they had, without a doubt, these informal activities, informal gatherings, and to some degree, yes, activities that were coordinated among each other and even with the Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's quite fascinating. I think we have time for one more question. I have one up my sleeve, but I wanted to see if somebody else has a question as well. Last chance to ask one, and just have to notify if you want to. I don't see anybody, so I'll ask you my question. If there's anybody else still with a question, we can still take one afterwards. Because you make a good case of why there was an informal, of course, because of repression, structural continuity. Now, what I'm interested in was their main goal, because of course, how did they imagine to be how did they imagine political Islam? I mean, because I think even the Islamic Declaration talks about, the goal of Islam as a political system only in, of course, Muslim majority states, and Yugoslavia was far from it. And of course, in the early 1980s, nobody imagined Bosnia-Herzegovina as a state. So how did they imagine, the role of political Islam in a country like Yugoslavia, where Islam is a minority religion essentially, and where they couldn't hope that the political system, even if it weren't communist, could become shaped by Islam or by political Islam. And that brings me kind of connected to that was their main activism in a certain way to convince or to reach out to Muslims or to nominal Muslims, Muslims with a capital M to become Muslims with a small m. Was this their main kind of activism, or to make people who are going to mosques anyhow, who are already Muslims with a small m, to be more religious in a particular way? Or so in a certain way, where was their main thrust of their activities?
Super. Thank you a lot, Florian, for this question. So the thing, I will start from this capital and small m, because if you know, maybe the article, it is written by Hussein Jozo. And I'm sure that it is also the view that Alia, because Alia said many times that he shared absolutely the views with Hussein Jozo in that time. Hussein Jozo said that the main historical, let's say, thing in that particular moment when the Muslim with the capital M came into existence, when they recognized the Muslim nationality with the capital M, Hussein Jozo said in that moment that it is of utmost, of the crucial, essential importance who will lead let's say the emancipation, let's say the development, further development of this nation. Those with the small m or those with the capital M. This was I'm quoting almost now, I'm paraphrasing, the Hussein Jozo, yeah? So I think that there were I agree absolutely with you. I'm coming this with what you started your question. I think that this was a little bit utopian, that in the state like Bosnia, it wasn't realistic that you establish some kind of Islamic state. But to some degree, I think that they really believed, and because they really were very, very strong in their convictions, that they really believed that if they, in some way, that if they can influence this process, that these people of small m who belong to this identification of small m, that if they took over this whole process of further development of this Muslim with the capital M national identity, and if they can shape it in this Islamic in this Islamic direction, that they will have some kind of positive outcomes. Of course, I think that and I know that you worked, and this is very interesting. A few days ago, finished the MA thesis from Rudolf Harm, your student who was dealing with Muslim landscape glass and Lilian. So you can also see many interesting stuff regarding this, particularly how it developed in the 90s. Of course, the small m didn't, and this Bosnia didn't become Islamic State. But I think that, okay, I think that in many things they succeeded in the end, because the Party of Democratic Action is, first of all, absolutely monopolized the political sphere in Bosnia and Herzegovina for decades now. This is the first thing. And the second thing is how you are now, we have to see this, and also you have to be aware that in the Islamic political thought and Islamic movements, you have these two different approaches. This is a gradual approach and a revolutionary approach. I think that they were absolutely aware that this revolutionary approach is out of question. But this gradual approach, that you are going, year by year, decade by decade, and trying to influence the society, to what you said, that you Islamize the small m even, not only the capital M, but also to Islamize. And now you, in that, I think that they succeeded. The small m became much more Islamized than it was in the past, much more. And that now they are also trying to influence as much as they can, of course, this Bosniak, or let's say the national identity, in the sense of this Islamic or so on values.
Great, thanks. This was really insightful. I think we have to leave it here, but thank you for sharing your PhD research with us, Ivan. I think it was much food for thought on topics which are been covered in scholarship, but I think you're really adding some interesting angles to it. So I appreciate your being with us today. Thanks.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Florian. All the best.